This is it. It's happening. The boom is around the corner. Feels like just yesterday the Apple Vision came out, and for only $3,500. What a steal! Especially in comparison to something like the Meta Quest, which costs, what, $250? And today? Well, according to sales numbers and reports, it looks like it's already failed, with Apple putting on the back burner for 2025. Wow, I have definitely not heard this story before. So what happened? I mean, we saw them marketed to the sun, right? They were everywhere. All these YouTubers, bloggers, morning shows, news, they were all talking about them. And from a marketing perspective, they seem pretty cool, right? People were posting videos trying to integrate them into their daily lives. Who doesn't see VR and go, wow, this is the future? Okay, well, many people obviously, and to be fair, they make a good point. There have been many failed attempts like the Virtual Boy, Google Daydream, Google Glass, which is technically AR, but still. In this day and age, VR seems to be somewhat of a gimmick in many people's eyes, especially in the consumer realm. And you can hold your own opinions on it, but we've come a long way, and science and technology are still taking leaps and bounds every year in this field. But before we go any farther, let's go on a quick journey through history. When was the first time we ever saw VR? Well, that kind of depends on what your definition of VR is and who you ask. Is it as simple as tricking yourself into the illusion that you're somewhere when you really aren't? Because if so, you could argue the 360 panoramic paintings from the 18 and 1900s, such as the Battle of Borodino, which you've probably seen on TikTok, could be argued as such. If you're a film buff, you might argue that in 1896, when the Lumiere brothers released Les Raveurs d'un terrain en gare de Ciotat, arrival of train at La Ciotat station with the cinematograph. The story goes that all those people who had never seen a moving picture before had a huge panic in the theater at this oncoming train about to hit them. I've always wondered about this though, because yes, people had never seen anything like this before, but at the same time, it was grainy and black and white. People don't see in black and white, so you'd assume they'd have to know it wasn't real, right? Around that era, you also had Edison with his kinetograph and kinetoscope that you'd watch short movies on. If you want a more current idea of what 3D is, we would have to date back to around 1838 to Charles Wheatstone's stereoscope. If you were ever at Disney World or got those cheap 3D glasses for attractions or events, this is the basis of all that. If you don't know what a stereoscope is, in layman terms, it's when you take an image and split it into two, and slightly alter both. Not in a way that one is pink and purple and the other is green and yellow, but in a way that the image is slightly off-center from each other. A parallax. This effect makes things seem enveloping. Depending on how old you are, you might remember the little Viewmaster toys we had. It's pretty much those. Remember when I said it kind of depends on who you ask when the true start of VR was? Because some would say, no, that's dumb, that's only a painting, a photo, a movie, whatever it is, that's not really VR. It's clearly the late 1920s or early 30s with the Link Trainer, which was the first commercial flight simulator training our troops prior to World War II. Ah yes, the military-industrial complex. We're going to be seeing a lot of them. To be fair, I don't disagree. A lot of this isn't really what I think VR is personally. It feels like in the book Pygmalion Spectacles was the first true idea of what the modern world thinks VR is. This book is from the 1930s and is about a man who finds a pair of glasses that when he puts them on, he gets to experience these crazy fictional worlds where you see, touch, smell, taste everything you can imagine, until he takes the glasses off. Almost like those who solved the three-body problem on Netflix. To me, this is the first true idea of virtual reality. It wouldn't be until the 1950s that we picked this concept back up. Apparently, the world was in like a war or something. I don't know. Some angry man said my people shouldn't exist and we should build a bomb. Who knows? But in the 1950s, specifically 1957, we got the Sensorama created by filmmaker Morton Heilig. I want to say it was given this name because it was all-encompassing like a panorama, but the 1950s were kind of weird where they started adding Rama to everything. Anyway, it was this cabinet that consisted of 6 short films that Morton created, and this cabinet would stimulate all of your senses when watching it. You would sit in this vibrating chair, fans would puff smells at you, etc. Morton made 6 films: Motorcycle, Belly Dancer, Dune Buggy, Helicopter, A Day with Sabrina, and I'm a Coca-Cola Bottle. And before you ask, no, they were not good. But that's not the point. Now we've explored a bunch of concepts that built up VR, but who cares about all that? Where do we get to the point where we know VR to be what it is today? Where are the HMDs? Head-mounted displays. Morton actually technically made the first one of these as well in the early 60s, the Telesphere mask. What did it do? Nothing. It was a pair of goggles with television tubes right next to your retinas. Totally non-interactive and definitely headache-inducing. So maybe that wasn't it, but the idea is there. Anyway, what are our friends in the military-industrial complex doing at this time? Boop, in 1961, they created the HeadSight. What did it do? It was a closed-circuit system where you'd have a camera attached to a HMD, and you could look around using the camera with a headset. So you'd turn your head left, and the camera would turn left. Not really VR, but we finally made progress. We finally have motion tracking technology. Now, the 1960s were a really cool time. You had some big jumps in technology, but you also had some real development in the concept of what VR is really going to be. But more importantly, how much acid do I need to drop to come up with some really cool concepts? Ivan Sutherland in 1962 created a program called the Sketchpad, which was the first program to really create and control shapes and objects using computer interfaces. Prior to this, when we were creating things on then what was known as a computer, it was all done using code, nothing visual. In short, he's the reason we have CAD, which is used heavily in engineering and design. This led to the idea of the ultimate display, which wasn't a tangible thing, but a concept. He sat down and looked at what we had and said, what if we had HMDs connected to computers instead of cameras? And the computers can create worlds for us, and using these headsets, we could feel things, and there would be feedback like we really held it. Wouldn't that be cool? So while he alone didn't do it, with help from his student Bob Sproul, humans achieved greatness. In 1968, they created the first prototype of the Sword of Damocles, which if you know the story, you know how fitting this title is. It was a giant headset that hung from the ceiling because it was so structurally huge, but also because it was connected to computers and had different pickups that needed to be able to sense what was around the person and create a whole world around them. And yes, by world, I mean it was just superimposing wireframe objects in a room, but that is in fact creating a world separate from our own. Later through the years in the mid-70s, we would have people that would make more forward steps, such as Myron Kruger, who created the concept of artificial reality. What he created is regarded as the first interactive VR system with what he called the video place. You've probably seen a variation of this before if you've ever been to an art space with an interactive video screen wall. Using cameras and computers to judge where you are on the wall position-wise allows you to interact with different things on the screen. In 1977, Richard Sayer, Dan Sandin, and Thomas DeFanti created the Sayer gloves, which were our first concept of putting our hands into the computer. Not like that. But the computer would be able to tell your finger movements, gestures, all with these wires on the glove hooked up to the computer. In 1978, Eric Howlett created the LEAP system, which stood for Large Expanse Extra Perspective. Without going into details, it's pretty much a fancy stereoscopic lens and viewer system. We're going to come back to this later. The 80s though, that's when it all starts coming together. But it's also kind of a confusing time because everyone's using each other's technology to come up with their own things that really aren't their own things. But before we get into that, what are our friends in the military-industrial complex up to? Oh, more complex realistic flying simulators. Neat. 1984. That's a cool year. The first commercial VR company, VPL Research, Visual Programming Lab, is founded under Thomas Zimmerman, creator of the Data Glove, and Jaron Lanier, one of the coolest dudes in the world of technology. Fun fact, he's the father of VR and actually coined the term as well. Over the years, they created actual color VR systems, not just wires and frames. The iPhone, no, not that one. This one was the first full RGB HMD to exist. Not just that, but it worked with the Data Glove and later the Data Suit. What's the data suit, you say? Oh, you know, just a full freaking haptic suit to interact with the VR world you're seeing with the iPhone and controlling with the Data Glove. Do you understand how insane this all is? We've never seen anything like this in the world before. Do you understand what we are doing with things like haptic suits today? Alright, well, I guess that's one thing. Unrelated, Jaron, if you could just respond to my emails about an interview, that'd be great. I've been trying to reach you forever. Now, the 1980s is when NASA gets into the game and starts pouring so much money into their own VR systems they were creating called NASA Views. Virtual Interface Environmental Workstations. Finalized in 1989, working with VPL for their systems and LEAP for their visuals, created to train astronauts in different scenarios. But in 1989, Howlett released the Cyberface. Yeah, that name is very tongue-in-cheek, I know. Which uses stereoscopic monochromatic displays commercially. That's right, our first commercially available HMD systems. And it flops. Also, I know what you're about to say. You just said the iPhones were first. I did, but those came out in June. This one released in March. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, it was a flop. But in 1992, they released the Cyberface 2, which made up for the issues of low-quality displays and higher field of vision. They also came out with the Cyberface 3 later, which was its final iteration. These were primarily made for lab usage, but sadly, the interest in expensive VR systems were waning by the mid-90s. Funny how history feels cyclical, right? But dial back to 1991, Antonio Medina created a VR system called the Computer Simulated Teleoperations for us to control the Mars rover one day. That's right, aliens, we're coming for you. Oh, it's the 90s and you know it's coming, gamers. This marks the start of virtual arcade machines, where you'd be in an arcade in a giant chair with goggles playing multiplayer games with each other. In 1993, Sega made the first VR gaming headset that never released to the public. But the Virtual Boy in 1995, the second worst console ever, comes out and it is a mess. If you know anything about video games, you've probably heard of this monstrosity. It was a huge flop, releasing only 14 games in the USA and 19 in Japan. As someone who's actually played the Virtual Boy multiple times, it's terrible. Its true 3D graphics are nothing but awful cheap stereoscopic wired red frame graphics that kill your eyes and cause mass nausea about 15 minutes of usage. It was so bad that Nintendo didn't touch the concept of 3D again until 2010 with the 3DS. As I said, the fad of VR at this point is kind of diminishing because it's super expensive in nature and it's feeling kind of like a gimmick. So the world put this concept on pause. Huh? What was that? 2007, we have Google Street View, and we get to see the world from our computer screen. And in 2010, they created a 3D stereoscopic Street View mode for it? Wait, what is this? Early 2010s, the Oculus Rift Kickstarter happens, and this is it. It's happening. The boom is around the corner. 2013, the Google Glass comes out, which is more of an augmented reality smartphone thing on your eyes. It flops, but 2014, Facebook buys the Oculus VR company for $2 billion. 2016, the boom is officially upon us. The Vive, the Rift, Oculus Go, Nintendo Switch VR Labo. 2021, the Pico Neo 3 is launched and is bought by ByteDance, the owners of TikTok. The MetaQuest comes out in 2023 after Meta dumps $10 billion into VR and AR. And all of this brings us to today with the Apple Vision Pro, a $3,500 VR AR headset that is following the lines of all the other failed endeavors. Or is it? What does the future of VR hold for us? Is it a gimmick? Is it something that's going to be here permanently in the future? Will it destroy our eyes? Will Jaron Lanier ever respond to my email so I can interview him? Because gosh darn it, I am trying. In my personal opinion, it's kind of hard to see VR succeeding anytime soon. I feel like it just doesn't have a real purpose in our world yet. Of all the mentioned headsets in the last 2 decades, the only ones that seem to have any staying power were the ones made specifically for video games, and I think that's mainly because the points of affordability and the point of relevance. It's so much different than dropping a couple $100s for like a MetaQuest to play some video games casually, because you can just kind of put that on the shelf and be like, whatever, it was a fun little thing to buy or pick it up whenever, but spending like $3,500 is a big chunk of change for most people. I do think in the next like 20 or 30 years, it's going to be incorporated into our daily lives. I don't know about mine because I can't really put them on right now. I have visual therapy I'm going through, a lot of concussions, my head doesn't really work, but you know, one day I might be able to use them. I had a lot of fun looking all this up because I really had no concept of what VR really was in the past. I kind of always just thought it started with like the VR goggles, like the Oculus Rift, but really knowing that it dates back so far is actually really fascinating to me. If I mixed up anything, if I messed it up, let me know in the comments because I'm just an armchair analyst right now. I'm looking at things I find interesting and making videos on them for you.